Hello, Catherine, bore da. Nice to see you.
And to see you too.
So I'm beginning with these interviews with the question about what has been your faith journey into Quakers. When did you arrive? What were you looking for? Why did you stay?
My first memory of a Quaker meeting was at the age of about 4. My mother was a Quaker, and uh, in those days, it was expected that I would come in and sit for the hour. And we didn't have a car. There was no public transport at that time on a Sunday. This is Wales, remember. And so Quakers came to my mother's house. So the meeting was held in my mother's sitting room. And I sat in the little child's chair for the hour and listened and sat and was a bit restless, but not very much. And watched the fire, because in those days it was fires in the grates, nothing else, no other form of heating. So I watched the flames. I remember the hour quite vividly. Yes, so that's when, in other words, I was brought up in a Quaker household,
Yes,
and it was the natural thing was to be a Quaker.
yes.
We all, 4 of us, I'm the youngest, but the 4 of us all went to the Quaker school called Ackworth in Yorkshire.
All right.
So at the age of 11, we went off to boarding school. And there, of course, there was Quaker meeting uh, constantly. At the age of 11 there, you weren't expected to stay there, to be a whole hour, except twice a term, because you had a junior meeting during the week on a Thursday, I think. And that for us was, I think, just over half an hour. And you worked your way up to another whole hour. So it was morning assembly was 15 minutes, and most of that was silence. There would be a little talk and then there would be silence. So it was very much part of my upbringing.
Yes. So
And
tell me about some of your memories of, you said you remember them vividly then. So tell me about what are some of those vivid memories as such a young child, both in Ackworth and actually in your mother's sitting room.
um, well, of course, at home, it was a very small group of the same Quakers who came most of the time. And I don't have particular memories really of those very, apart from the first one, because it was so different from anything like I'd experienced before. Um, I do remember an American coming. Now, he was a Quaker pastor. We don't have pastors in Britain, but in some places in America, they have people who do more leading of the meeting than would be normal in this country. And I remember him coming, and it was extremely odd because he spoke for so long, which was not what we did in our house. Um, and after about 20 minutes, he said, he started speaking after about, I think, a quarter of an hour, and then he spoke for about 20 minutes. I thought that was very peculiar. And then he said something very odd. I don't want to keep you folks. I mean, I can remember the whole meeting kind of looked at him, and there was a murmur from the elder. No, no, we're fine. So we went back into silence, and blow me, he started talking again, which I knew even at the age of about 8, you didn't do. He'd had his turn, other people should be allowed to speak. I remember his name, he was called William Bacon Evans.
Oh.
And it was the name Bacon that struck me, as a child. I'd never heard anybody called Bacon before. Um, so I do remember that as an oddity because, of course, people in my meeting, if you spoke, you spoke, and then you were quiet. You didn't speak again. You'd said, had you say, and somebody else would speak. I remember that very clearly from, and then when I grew a bit older, actually, we had babies in the meeting. So from about the age of 8, so William Bacon Evans must have been there earlier. But perhaps I would take the little ones out and look after them. So I did the Sunday school. And when we went to boarding school, I really, really loved meeting. Loved it. Because, boarding school with people around, there were too many people there. I found that I didn't quite get enough space.
Mm,
But in meeting, oh, it was just you and God, wasn't it? Nobody could. I was always in trouble because I'm untidy. Boarding schools expect you to be tidy. So when I was in meeting, nobody could tell me off. Nobody could interfere. I had that total space, even though there were 400 other children there
mm,
and teachers. Still, I had peace. The meeting became very important, just in one way to have that space.
yeah. What was can I ask you about the language? What was it like for you? I mean, I'm assuming that you grew up and the ministry was in Welsh and then an American came over and put it all into English and and the
No,
Ackworth experience compared to home?
no, that was all English. Ackworth, obviously. Well, at home, it was my father was the Welsh speaker, but he died, and we didn't have it. That's why we no longer had a car and that sort of thing, and money was a bit tight. Um, my mother was actually brought up in Liverpool, so the the meetings were mainly in English. So that was not. It was just that was not an issue in that sense. I was used to hearing that. And my father uh, was a Calvinistic Methodist, but he'd been a conscientious objector in the First World War, so was quite close to Quakers.
Mm,
And he was, an organist and Cotor Canu. What's that in English? In the chapel. He would lead the singing in the chapel, and he played the organ, and he was a deacon, and he went round, he was a lay preacher. But he died when I was a baby, when I was quite small. So no, meeting was in English mainly.
yeah,
The people who came that time were um, most of them were English speaking,
mhm.
not all of them.
So tell me about Ackworth then. So that carried on and you were there all through your teens? How did your Quaker experience develop?
You don't think about it, do you? It's just taken for granted. That's how it is. And I think, just meeting every Sunday, meeting in the middle of the week. School assembly was a very short meeting. So it was, and of course, you heard people minister, some of them more interesting than others to a child, to a youngster. Um, some extremely good ministry. And we had on a Sunday evening, we had Sunday evening reading, and that was because there were all sorts of um, people there. There weren't just Quakers there. Um, that was, we would have hymns and readings and a speaker. So it was more like a conventional church service, but most of the time, you had Quakers there to speak.
Mm,
So um, you don't remember the details of what people said, but it is accumulative over your
yeah.
teens, where you have um, you you pick up the idea of service. Quite often it was people who'd been out in the field doing things for others. So I think you pick up that idea
Mm.
of, of the way in which it would be expected that you would work, if you know what I mean.
But am I right in thinking that there was a strong Christian foundation to
Oh yes, oh
that?
yes, because we would at home we would quite often there would be times when after supper my mother would read the Bible, a bit of the Bible, or one of us would read a bit of the Bible. Then we would each of us do yeah, at the age of 5 or 6, you are expected to do a bit of textual analysis. What do you see? What do you find in that passage? And so you'd say, and if you were about being younger, I was often way off beam. Um, you, if you were a bit, you know, like going really far from the text, you would each be asked, so where do you find that in the text? And there was no right answer, but you
Mm.
had to look at what was there and say, what does that mean to you? What do you think is there any message there? And if you were not paying proper attention, you were brought back to the, to that. And the Bible was seen as something that was in two languages. In one language it says this, and the other language it says that. So you were never seen as there was never this, it was never prescriptive.
Mm.
It was never prescriptive because you were expected to think, and it was seen as something, an interesting text. When we were very small, my mother would read to us. And I remember her reading the Acts of the Apostles because that was so exciting what they did, where they
Mm.
went, and what happened, and there was shipwreck, and there was, it was seen as an interesting text, but never with, we have the answer.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, when people, I find it quite difficult when people talk about the Bible as if, it says this. Question then, does it? Where do you find that in the text? And what else do you find in the text? So
Mm.
it was always something to be studied, to be, oh, yeah. But then we also read, remember we read Shakespeare as a family, some of the plays, and I was the littlest, so I got the servant coming in with one line. I remember my mother reading Pilgrim's Progress to us. She was a very good reader. So it was, it was a very questioning religion. It was never a prescriptive religion. You were never ever told this is what you should think, this is what
Mm.
you should do, this is what you. It was think, think what you're doing.
Mhm. So tell me about then as you moved into your later teens and you left school and because at that point many people drift away from the religion they've been brought up with, but here you are still in Quakers. So tell me how that came about.
Well, of course, if we went through university, you'd be going home anyway, you know. So if it was the Sunday when meeting was there, you went to meeting. That was um I suppose I went less to meeting, but I think it was part of my DNA. And sitting in meeting, there was always that sense of peace, an hour when you could be quite quiet and you were free within that hour. I think it's a sense of freedom it gave me. I did go to other churches a bit, you go around, but it was always so prescriptive from the pulpit, always telling you what to think. Oh, not always, but very often,
Mm.
um, it was prescriptive, and I wasn't used to that. It was, yeah, it was, you come to a, um, it was always use your brains. The feeling was God gave you brains, use them.
Mm.
Um, and don't necessarily come to the same conclusion as I've come to. I mean, within parameters, but it was the freedom of it that I liked about
Mm.
Quaker. It was part of my DNA, and the idea that you could discuss things, whereas people would say, I remember someone who considered herself a very, very wonderful Christian who would say, I would say something about the Bible. This was outside Quakers. Um, she would smile patronizingly at me and say, and say, it'd be very nice to think that. So who are you to tell me it would be very nice to think that? Who are you? This sense of, but in fact, of course, the Bible means what I think it means. That was her, you know, her take on the Bible. I know what it means. Never that sense of exploration where you delved a bit deeper and you might learn something new.
Mm.
And that was it was the openness and it was the interest of being able to explore
Mm.
that I got in Quakerism. I mean, I would listen to what other people had to say. That was always interesting what other people had to say. And always I was, I suppose, brought up to respect the fact that other people had different opinions.
Mm.
But I got me very annoyed when I was young about the people who didn't respect my opinions as well. I respect yours, respect mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's brought up that way.
So how did your Quaker or your faith generally and your Quaker experience develop as you've got older? Has it changed or has it stayed fairly constant?
I think your experience of the spiritual is always new. It's never same old, same old. It's always, you get new insights. Um, you get perhaps different ways of being open to the spirit, a different way of sensing that presence. But where people get so hung up about calling it this or that or the other and and what it's like. I think you get to understand more as you go through life of the fact that you understand some things at certain times, and at other times other things are more important about your experience of the spirit. Yeah, that doesn't perhaps make much sense.
Mm.
Uh, it can be different, it can change, um, can be. It's because it's beyond words.
Mm.
So, but I think it's very helpful if you're brought up in a bilingual place because you get each language has a slightly different take on it. So, yeah, when I've been abroad for any length of time and no Quakers around, I have gone to different churches. And in different languages, you have different insights, different. It's not quite the same thing in Welsh as it is in English. I worked in France for a bit when I was young, student. And going into the Catholic Church, it was their way, fine, but it was too elaborate for me. And I lived in Iceland for a bit. And I went to the Lutheran church there. And again, at all sorts of the Lutheran churches, very much more like a Welsh chapel.
Mm.
But the it wasn't to me. It was again very elaborate. So, you go to other churches, you respect that that's their way. I've spent some time with Carmelite nuns for me on a very ad hoc basis. And again, you find insights there. But I wasn't, the rules and regulations of Carmelite nuns and how it is and how it's to be done. It's not me.
Mm. So I'm just thinking that you've got all of this experience and participation in a variety of different aspects of Christianity. Do you reflect on how we are as a society today and perhaps over the last, 20, 30 years or so, that we've drifted away from Christianity, would you say?
Some people have and some people haven't. I think it's a bit of a cliche to say it's a broad church, Quakerism, but it is because you're expected to find your own way to the spirit, your own way to openness, your own way to God. Some people don't like the word God. I've no idea why. It's only a word. I think it's because they've been taught as children to think of God in this way, and that's the only way to think about it, and therefore the word becomes synonymous with limitation. Whereas to me, the word God was synonymous with you'll only know a bit, but if the more open you are, the more you'll learn. Um, I people people find their own way. Quakers are very much seekers. We do find of one or two people who come in who are very dogmatic what about how things are. That's not Quakerism. It's 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 working together for enlightenment. It's not me telling you what to do, what to think. It's we work together without thinking that I will have the answer or you will have the
Mm.
answer. But together we might find a better answer.
And
So,
you said that you've experienced dogma, or some people are dogmatic. Do you mean Christian dogma or different types?
oh, it's very often no. Among Quakers, those who with a Christian background tend to be much more open,
Mm.
much more open. Um, Not always, but often. I mean, there's some people who have been bullied in their previous churches,
Mm.
who I
Mm.
understand they find they want to move away from that. But you find after a bit, if they, I mean, and that's fine. You use the words you want to use, but let me use the words I want to use, and just be tolerant of each other.
Mm.
Um, I have met, I've met people who've come in as atheists. It's fine, but don't try to make me or Quakers atheist, because this is the Religious Society of Friends. What we're doing is trying to be open to what is beyond the here and now.
So you're saying that where you've experienced dogma within Quakers, it's more of an
No, no,
atheist.
no. No, 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 dogmatic attitude,
Mm-hmm.
where people think that again, that's what I've experienced in other Christian churches, where this is how it's got to be. Um, and you do get people who come in like that. There are not many of them. You asked about it, and
Yes.
that's how it's not something that it irritates me sometimes when people tell me how it's got to be. And I was, even at the age of 5 or 6, I was being asked for my opinion,
Mm,
um, and how I saw things. Um, and if I was, as a child, way off beam, I would be presented with other suggestions.
mm,
But I was not being told this is what it is.
no.
I don't take kindly to being told this is what you have to think. Wasn't brought up to.
Now you see what you're saying resonates with me, you see, when you say there is a certain dogmatic attitude sometimes, and it may well be a small number of people, but there's a certain because I think we've moved away from Christianity, which obviously I mean I've been in Quakers for 20 years, so I don't know what it was like before then. But I have an assumption that it was more based in Christianity then, and more of a shared understanding that that was the foundational teachings that you could then work with and respond to and have your own questioning attitude. But because we've moved away from that, I worry sometimes that there are different perspectives coming in, and some of those are atheistic, for example, and that then other things become the truth, if you like, or the dogma. Other things become the prescriptive ways of how you should think about the world. And it's things around, for example, where the testimonies or the climate change issue, that becomes almost a bigger central idea within how Quakers are. And maybe it's a small tendency, but I mean, you just said something about it irritates you. And I find myself irritated about it. And I don't really even know what it is that I find irritating about it, which is why I want to kind of talk it through and see what other people feel about these.
I think it's people trying to direct your thoughts and people ignoring your spiritual experiences, because being open to the spirit is a different thing from having an intellectual discussion, which is what we're doing now. Um, I think they haven't, people who are, I mean, I've always known that each Quaker can be individually led in a different direction about their own life and how they lead it, how they live it, um, what they feel led to do. All these things these are like, um, we're all individuals, we're all led, we all have different gifts. You're expected to use your gifts. Um, but you're not expected to tell somebody else how to use their gifts. If they ask you for advice, then you are expected to ask them questions, not to tell them what to do. You're expected to sit down with them and say, what would you think about this? Or what about that aspect? That's the Quaker way. You have to find your way. We're seekers. And some people don't understand that we are seekers. I mean, I'm very happy for anybody to come in. I'm very happy if atheists want to come to meeting and sit with us for that quiet hour. That's fine. But don't try to make me an atheist.
Mm. What do you think about? the idea that you were taught so much about the Bible and encouraged to look deeply within what the Bible, as you know, as the wisdom tradition of our culture. Um, Whereas I'm not sure, I don't see evidence that young people in Quakers are given that same guidance and teaching.
I think that's right. And I think it's a bit of a loss because um, it's it's actually, the testimonies, if you look at them carefully, where did you get them from? The New Testament.
Mm,
Look at the origins, and life changes. There are new things coming in that you have to deal with, some things that you don't have to deal with anymore as life changes. Um, it's just this being open-minded is what we were taught.
mm,
And I think the need is to go back to not to cut out other things, but to find, you can learn from other religions. You can enrich your tradition with other things, but don't cut out. I mean, don't cut out things that don't suit me. I mean, I don't. If you're joining Quakers, then there will be parts of Quakerism that appeal to you more than others. So that's fine. But then perhaps somebody else has a different slant on it, and
mm,
that's also fine. Um, don't quarrel about it.
mm,
Just learn from each other. Think. Um, we weren't just taught about Christianity. We were led to think about the other religions in the world and what you could learn from them. It was not a narrow-minded religious education. It was much more open-minded than
mm.
the people who will not open the Bible as if it's anathema.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, that seems to be extremely narrow-minded.
Well, that I think what worries me. I do feel that if we are um if we are honest about how Quakers are developing at the moment is that there is a kind of an antipathy towards the Bible and Christianity and a reticence then people hold back and don't talk about as you've just said that the testimonies come from our Christian understanding of the world and I worry sometimes that our young people don't even know that. You talked about, we all experience the presence in our lives. Now, you could, I assume you're talking about the presence of God or the presence of the Holy Spirit in your life. I'm not sure whether young people are even aware of that as the language of a fairly typical language of a religious life. And I'm not convinced at all. I hear young people talking about peace or the environment or equality, but I don't really hear them talking about the presence of God or talking about universal love or divine force even. I don't even hear that kind of idea.
I think, well, then that's the fault of us, those of us who are older, isn't it? That we haven't passed on that tradition. And I think
I
it,
think so. I
yeah,
think so. Yeah.
yes. And I think because often people come in to Quakers later on in life, they often come in with a lot of baggage from other churches because they come to Quakers very often because perhaps they've been bullied into thinking, into saying, yes, that's what I believe, or the church has expected them to say, this is what I believe. Um, and they want a bit more freedom to explore their own spirituality. And then they can be a bit, they can talk about Christianity as if it is limiting and dogmatic and narrow. And that's not what Christianity is. And when you read the Bible, anybody who's read the Bible knows it contradicts itself 6 times over. It's that's what's so interesting about it.
Mm,
That's so interesting. And you have to see it in its cultural context. Um, you know, but main, its main, the main thrust of the New Testament is loving kindness.
mm. And you see, I hear young people talking about, um, the need to be kind, for example, and completely dissociating that from anything to do with Christianity, and not genuinely not seeing and understanding the link,
No,
and genuinely not even understanding that where that love comes from is some kind of deep experience of the presence of God in our lives and in our bodies, in our minds, in our hearts. And we don't talk about it enough. And exactly what you said there, have we passed this on? Are we passing it on? I don't think we are. And I think that's perhaps one of the reasons why I've started these videos is to reflect, and certainly those of us who are, let's just say, over 40, in the second half of our lives, what should we be passing on? Because just to have openness, what you've got to have some kind of foundational teaching, haven't you? To be able to be open.
just having openness is wishy-washy. And you need, in fact, Quakerism, we talk about Quaker faith and practice, that's our book of discipline. And some people say, oh, don't want the word discipline. Unless you discipline yourself, you get nowhere.
No.
You get nowhere. And um, you need you need the discipline of listening to other people
Mm,
and the discipline of openness to know that you can learn from other people. Sorry. But then they have to learn from you as well. It's a two-way thing, and it's suggestions and ideas, and it's respect for the other person's spiritual experiences.
mm. While you've been talking, I've been thinking about the Book of Discipline Revision, which I think you're involved in, actually, aren't you?
Yes.
Do you get a sense that it's moving away from discipline and into the wishy-washy?
No.
Good. Good. Is it keeping the title Book of Discipline?
Oh, I have no idea. Oh, yes, it will be the Book of Discipline. It's always been the Book of Discipline
Yes.
for the past, well, I forget, I'm sorry, I forget how many years. I'm not a proper historian. Um, but it just means this is what we agree on,
Yes.
and this is how we work together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you think about it, you cannot work together without some sort of discipline, can you?
Well, that's right. Yeah.
And that's what it is. It's saying this is what we've agreed on. And the fact that it's revised every now and again
Hmm.
means that it is not, again, it's not dogmatic. There are certain things this is how we do things, which are laid down, and that's how we do things
Yeah.
now. We might have a better idea in 30, 40, 50 years' time. Um, so it's an agreement. The Book of Discipline really is an agreement. I'm on the committee that's rewriting the one we have, but we don't have any right at all to say how it will be. This is a draft that goes before all Quakers in the whole of Britain,
Mm.
and unless it has to be agreed at yearly meeting for the whole of Britain. It's
So what are your thoughts about the future of Quakerism then? I went to the conference a couple of months ago, the future of Quakerism in Britain. What are your thoughts about how how we're doing and how we're moving forward?
I think Quakerism's always going to be untidy because you can be tidy, neat if you have certain things that this is what you've got to believe, this is what you've got to do, this is how you've got to behave in all circumstances, and this is how you've got to listen. If you're exploring or seeking enlightenment, if you're seeking the spiritual, it's going to be much more untidy, isn't it? And it's more exciting because you never know where it's going. And I think if you look at Quakers in Britain, I think it took me a long time to realize that our yearly meeting, which seemed big to me, is really a small part of world Quakerism.
Mm,
And there are other areas that are much more Bible based than we are here as Quakers in Britain. What the future is, who knows? Nobody knows. Um, I think that we have to do, I think I don't think when I was young, I realized that I should be telling other people I was a Quaker.
mm,
I don't think I realized that it would open the whole idea of Quakerism to other people who might find it spiritually helpful. I, I think that's the thing that we need to make people understand. You've got to be more open about the fact that you're a Quaker.
mm,
Because there will be people out there for whom this is the right place to be spiritually. And if you don't know that this place exists, you won't be here.
mm. So are you hopeful for the future?
I suppose I'm not neither hopeful nor unhopeful. It just is. It just is. And how we grow depends on each one of us. So how you can't foresee the future really, because it all depends on how I behave and what I do, how you behave, what you do, what work we do, and how open we are to that guidance that comes when you're quiet and silent, quiet within yourself, not just sitting silent and still, not the physical, which is helpful, but it's when you're inwardly still that you can be open to that spirit, to that understanding that there is something more than the here than and now. And see, I don't mind what people call that other. Don't mind if they use the word God. They don't mind if they use the word Christ, light, spirit, the divine. It's not the word that matters. And I think having two languages makes that clearer because in the translation into the other language, or from Welsh to English or English to Welsh, each language has different ideas associated with what's seen as being the same, the word for the same thing, but it feels different in different languages. So, and I think it's that openness which is important.
Mm.
And I also think that it's important that we do teach something about the origins of Quakerism, where we come from. If you've got a good foundation, it's easier to go ahead, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it is. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you very much, Catherine. Let's leave it there, and thank you for joining me this morning.
Very welcome. Nice to talk to you always.